Okay, for U.S. history, we have a set of notes to do. This set of notes is going to be quizzed on Friday the 28th, and then I will have you turn them in. So on a piece of paper, go ahead and put the topic, which is Civil Rights Movement. And you're going to be held responsible for knowing the two main goals and the strategy and methods, how the goals were achieved. Remember, this is Screencastify, so you can pause, back up, rewind, all that stuff you need to do. So I'm just going to go at a normal pace. Okay. So the first picture that you just saw there is a very famous picture of a young high school freshman who was one of the first Black students to desegregate Little Rock High School in Arkansas. And it became a famous image because you can see behind her the reaction of the people. They had arrived to basically try to keep the 9 Black students out. And you'll learn more about the history of this photo later. But just kind of keep that in mind that this is a 14-year-old high school freshman being chased around by a crowd of racists who don't want her in Little Rock High School because she's Black. So this is the kind of reaction that desegregation got in the South in the 1960s. So in class, we discussed the whole idea of race and the fact that the South had these very weird racial laws. And when I was talking about it in class, I put up these people, and people kind of said, well, some look Asian, some look white, some look Hispanic. But by the definitions of the South, every person on this chart, except for the little doll, would be considered Black or colored. They all have African ancestry, even the whitest people up here. As a matter of fact, this guy right here, who appears to be white, was actually an NAACP attorney who would go sit in on Klan meetings and listen to them because they thought he was white. He passed for white and listened to the plans of the Klan and reported them to the FBI. So that's the idea of race is a kind of a weird one. Skin color is determined by the amount of melanin in your skin, and that's it. There's no other biological distinction of race. So the whole idea of having race is weird as a distinction. But as we know, the Jim Crow laws took it to a whole nother level, and that's what we're learning about today. So go ahead and write down this definition of segregation. In the case of the South in the 1960s, it was separation of all public facilities by race. And they usually made a distinction of white or colored, but no other distinctions. And anything you could possibly imagine was segregated by race. So that is the first goal of the civil rights movement, is ending public facility segregation. Here you can see an example. There's a water fountain marked colored only, white only. Waiting rooms. These are the signs that were on buses. This one I put up here because these people are really confused. First of all, they have whites with an apostrophe S, and then Spanish or Mexican. Mexican's a nationality, and Spanish is a language unless you're from Spain. So this is just ignorance. The Jim Crow laws that were active in the South for almost 100 years came about, were nicknamed Jim Crow after this cartoon character from sort of the vaudeville days. And those Jim Crow laws were enacted right after the Civil War Reconstruction period ended and lasted until 1965. And it meant that every part of life in the South was segregated by race. Schools, libraries, theaters, even cemeteries were segregated. 2 Supreme Court cases you're going to need to know. In 1896, a case was brought by a man named Homer Plessy. He was a biracial man who got on a streetcar that was marked whites only and was arrested. That case went to the Supreme Court. And in 1896, the Supreme Court said segregation was okay as long as the facilities were equal. So that establishes a doctrine of separate but equal. That case is overturned in 1954 by Brown versus Board of Education. A little girl named Linda Brown sues for the right to attend the school that's closest to her that happens to be a white school. And what the attorneys for Linda Brown did was they traveled down to the South and they took footage of Black schools and white schools. And they demonstrated very clearly that the white schools had equipment, books, teachers. They basically, spent a lot more money on the white schools than in the Black schools. So since they proved that the facilities were not equal, the Supreme Court decided they could no longer be separate because it would be a violation of the rights of Black Americans. So what you need to know is in 1896, the Plessy case is overturned in 1954, and that's when the schools are ordered integrated. And that's just going to be the first battle in getting integration achieved in the South was with schools and universities. Um, so, as I mentioned, schools were first, universities. Then they're going to make a push to desegregate all public facilities. There's going to be kind of a snowball effect. First, it's the schools, then there's going to be the Montgomery bus boycott, and soon there's so many challenges that within about 9 years, they passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that ended segregation in public facilities. You could no longer legally segregate any public facilities in the United States. And that falls under the 14th Amendment, which is equal protection under law. White Southerners resist these changes, sometimes violently. And unfortunately, the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s is going to see a lot of violent reaction from the Klan and white Southerners. Goal number 2 of the civil rights movement is to protect voting rights. And Blacks had the right to vote since 1867. At least Black men had. Remember that women didn't get the right to vote until 1920. But they were not being allowed to vote freely in the South. They were being terrorized and intimidated. They would be attacked by the Klan. In fact, the entire reason the Klan was founded was to try to keep Blacks from voting in the South after the Civil War. And that was allowed to go on for almost 100 years. A lot of Black politicians were attacked by the Klan. A lot of Black voters encountered, terrorism when they tried to register or vote. The federal government is going to have to step in at a certain point because these states are failing to protect the rights of their Black citizens, and the federal government is going to have to intervene to do that. States had tried all kinds of tricks like charging a poll tax or having a literacy test to try to prevent Blacks from voting. And because of that, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is going to outlaw all those random state requirements. We're even having trouble with that in the present day because there's a lot of states attempting to pass voting restrictions that are exactly like what they tried in the 1960s. The 24th Amendment is going to be passed, and that prohibits a poll tax. And by that, it means attempting to charge people money to vote, either charging them a fee or requiring something they have to buy in order to vote. Okay, so we learned the 2 goals of the civil rights movement. The first was ending segregation. The second is protecting voting rights. And the strategy that they used to do this is called nonviolent civil disobedience. And you have learned about this before. It is the process of resisting unjust or immoral laws, but using nonviolence. And for most of these movements, they, ask their followers to commit to those tactics. And those tactics include things like boycotting products, sit-ins, marches, protests, hunger strikes. Those are all different strategies under civil disobedience. Gandhi is a good example. Gandhi's movement of the 1940s achieved independence from Britain for India, and he did it through the use of all of these different strategies of nonviolence. And similarly, in California, we learned a couple of weeks ago about Cesar Chavez and his movement in Central California to protect the rights of farm workers. He used the lessons of Gandhi's movement in India to help the farm workers of California, and the same with Martin Luther King. All of these strategies we learn about now because they were successful. All of these movements worked, they achieved their goals, they encountered a lot of opposition, but they were committed to nonviolence, so they achieved their goals. Okay, that. And finally, let me go ahead and take this down. I'm going to be giving you guys one last little short set of notes, probably Wednesday, and then you'll have a quiz on the civil rights movement that will be sent to you through quizzes on Friday. I will want these notes to be turned in Friday also, so make sure that when you're writing them down, you're also remembering you're going to have to send me a scan or a picture of them. All right, so that is all you guys need to know for now, and I will talk to you later.